In this next episode of our Getting to Know Jesus series, we learn about first century clothing and how to make the significant biblical blue every Jewish male was commanded to wear. Today, Israel is a vibrant nation, full of people from all different walks of life, wearing a wide range of modern clothing styles. And yet, if you look closer, you will find a surprising similarity between some items worn today and what Jesus himself wore when he lived here. That's why, one beautiful morning in Tiberias, I met up with Danny the Digger, archaeologist and tour guide, and asked him to help me learn about the clothing Jesus wore in the first century. To begin our quest, we headed toward Nazareth, where Jesus grew up, and we returned to Nazareth Village. When we arrived, we were immediately transported back in time 2,000 years so we could truly experience how clothing was made when Jesus lived here.
The Nazareth Village really does a good job of presenting daily life in the days of Jesus. And this section is all devoted to making clothes.
Okay, here we are.
Oh, and it's our friend Miriam again.
Miriam.
How are you?
Hello.
You're Miriam the Weaver also.
Yes.
What are we going to see here?
This is the natural color of the wool.
Right.
But if you want it to be a colored wool, you have to dye it.
Right.
Yes,
Okay. So that's the process we're looking at here.
And Miriam is demonstrating right now how do you get a nice yellow color to the fabric. She's using, I see saffron and some vinegar. You know, it makes also, wow, instant yellow.
Instant yellow.
And
That's
in the
amazing.
back you can see some pink, some green, some red. It all depends. It's all coming from local ingredients of this region.
Right.
Let it dry out.
Okay, fantastic. And so then we have the color from there.
Yeah. And you either weave it with just that color and you got a nice yellow toga or a gown, or you mix them in the weaving process, and then you have Joseph's colored, how do you call it? Striped
The multicolored coat.
coat. Then you got Joseph multicolored coat.
Ah, very good.
Now the material itself is wool, at least here, at least in the galley. You also had flax, there was also cotton. If you could afford it, there was even silk available back then.
Right.
But not here.
Okay, so now we have color in the fabric. We need to figure out how to get that
Into a nice final product.
exactly.
That is done right here.
Let's give Miriam some room to work so that she can show us how.
So this is raw wool, okay, sheared, and this is after it's processed into a nice color.
Okay.
But first you need to make a fabric out of it. You need
Yarn.
to spin it. A yarn is the English word?
Yeah.
So this is the spinning wool. Known also from fairy tales, but it was an actual way
Okay.
of creating the yarn that you would later weave into make a coat, pants, a toga, sleeping blanket. Everything is done from this same in this same process.
Keeps adding pieces on, and
Yeah,
that's pretty incredible, really.
pretty simple and pretty
And
effective.
It's
it works.
strong, and yeah. Now, when it's spinning, sometimes it looks like when you're putting it, like wrapping it on, it's a little kinked and crooked. Does something have to happen before you use it?
I think that you also need to round it into like a ball and let it rest a bit so it catches the density of it is stabilized.
Okay. It needs to like relax over time, I guess.
Relax, yes.
Rest.
And this is now ready to be weaved.
Okay.
Pretty strong. I mean, I try
Very good.
To cut it.
Oh, that's great.
I wouldn't tie a boat to it, but definitely something to wear.
Not my boat, but...
And here is the weaving loom. Okay, again, it looks pretty simple, pretty basic, but frankly, what we're wearing is done in the same way. It's just much more industrial system, but it's taking some of those strings down to the floor, and they're attached to
weights.
Loom weights.
Right.
Which these are from clay. There can be also out of stone. When archaeologists found the first of those type of loom weights, they didn't really understand what it was. What are these perforated stones? And when an archaeologist doesn't understand something, what does he say? Oh, it must be cultic. It must be related to some religion. No, it's just to make a nice fabric. And it can either be using the plain color or using strings of different colors.
Right.
And then the shuttle.
Just going over and under and over and under.
This is called the shuttle, right, in English?
Yes.
Manor in Hebrew. Okay, the Bible tells us that the blade of Goliath was a weaver's shuttle, manor orgim. It was pretty big and deadly.
I see.
And here it is used in the original context of combining and creating different geometric patterns at times. And the final product is possibly what Joseph wore.
Oh, we have an example here.
Coat.
Yeah.
Okay, or it could be more plain, just white with stripes of yellow. But feel it, it's really nice.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Very good.
Could warm you up in the dark, in the winter.
Thank you, Miriam.
You're welcome.
Now, we see some different colors here other than just the yellow that we dyed over here.
Yeah,
Tell
the
me-
natural color is almost white. It's like beige.
Yes.
And if you want to color it, then we already saw how saffron is used. You can also use onion to get light yellow color. You can use the peel of the pomegranate to get something like dark orange.
Okay.
And if you want to get the royal color, then you use a snail.
Ah.
That was something that the Phoenicians discovered in the coastline of Phoenicia.
And that gets us these
Anything-
purples and blues.
Yes. Okay.
Now, this is interesting because after this, I'm going to go to Caesarea and meet our friend Baruch, who is going to show us how they have actually recreated the process to get these amazing blues and purples from the sea snail.
Yeah, we know that this was done in antiquity. We have both historical and archaeological data on this, but the mechanism was forgotten.
Wow.
Maimonides and medieval sages were puzzled how was it done, and Baruch and his team actually rediscovered the process, and they're making blue for the modern talit, the prayer shawl of the Jews today again.
Very good. Well, that was great. Thank you again, Danny, for bringing us here. Thank you, Miriam. It's been great to be with you here at Nazareth Village. Danny, let's go.
Let's go.
Don't go away. When we come back, we talk to the experts about the style of clothing Jesus wore and how knowledge of his clothing helps us understand some Bible stories about him. I was a pastor for over 20 years before I first went to Israel, only to realize that I was totally disconnected from the roots of my faith. Since then, I've been on a journey of discovery, and my faith has come alive in ways I never could have imagined. I'm Jeff Euters, Executive Director of First Century Foundations, and I'm excited to invite you to explore the land of the Bible and to discover your part in a Bible story that isn't over yet. First Century Foundations exists to reconnect Christians to the foundations of Christianity. And we do this by creating Bible-based media focused on Israel. But we don't just reconnect you to Israel in the Bible. We help you participate in what God is doing in Israel today by connecting you to over 70 ministries in Israel who desperately need our support. Will you partner with us? Together, We'll explore Israel's biblical past while playing our role in Israel's bright future. It was so interesting to see how first century clothing was made at Nazareth Village, and it made me even more curious about what Jesus wore when he lived here. What style did he have? What colors did he wear? And how might an understanding of his attire help us understand stories about him even better? To help answer some of these questions, I talked to a couple of experts in Israel.
It's really fun to be able to talk about clothing in the first century because we actually have such great resources to answer this question with certainty. We have remains of sandals, remains of fabrics of talit, of the prayer shawl that men would wear, and the tunics. We have headdresses, some jewelry, and so we have physical remains from the Judean wilderness, the desert where it's very dry. And we also have depictions on the walls of the synagogue at Dura Europos from around the 3rd century, and they're just like what we see in the caves of Masada and Bar Kokhba and Qumran. Things didn't change very quickly. Men wore a tunic. A tunic is just a simple dress with long sleeves and usually with stripes going down. We call these stripes clavii. It's just like a Roman would have worn. Across the Mediterranean, styles are extremely similar. What would be a difference between the garment of a Roman man and the garment of a Jewish man? A cloak of a Roman man would not have tassels, but the prayer shawl or the cloak of a Jewish man would have corners to which tassels are attached, and usually with a thread of blue in them.
And a prayer shawl serves to enable a person to kind of wrap himself in something to enable him to feel, I guess, more intensely involved in prayer with God. There's something about wrapping yourself and feeling like it's me and God. Now, God, of course, has no physical shape, so you're not going to embrace God. But by putting this prayer shawl around you, it's like you're shutting out everybody else, and it's you and God.
A man's shawl would also have a kind of a pattern that they call a neota pattern for the letter I. A woman's shawl would have a kind of right angle, which is a different indicator that this is a woman. And a woman's shawl did not have the tassels, the fringe of the garment. People wore turbans or head coverings. Of course, we're in a very hot climate here in Israel, and in the summer in particular, it keeps you from getting sunstroke, and in the winter, it keeps your head warm. They wore sandals that were split between the toe, and often not often, but in some cases, you can find remains of sandal socks. The tunic, they always wore it with the belt. It was considered a sign of immodesty to not have a belt around your tunic. So one of the criticisms of the Emperor Nero was that he went out with his tunic on and no belt to properly close it. And that is because they understood the belt separating the upper part of man, which is the part that is in relationship with God. It's the higher part, it's the intellect, from the lower part, which represents the baser instincts or just pure instinct.
When they built the altar is specified in Exodus initially and later on as well. There's a ramp that goes up to the altar, not steps. And an interpretation of that, Jewish interpretation, is that it is a more modest way for a priest to approach the altar. In those years, they didn't necessarily have pants. They would wear robes. And so if you're lifting your leg to go up a step, it may expose more of the leg than if you're just walking gradually up a ramp. We have the very explicit instruction of Micah. You shall be modest. You should walk modestly in the eyes of God. And some people I know have interpreted that, and I've heard this from some of my Christian friends, interpret that as a question of humility. But the word does not mean humility. The word means modesty. Hatsnea. It's about modesty. So yes, when you're modest, you are also humble, but the idea is modest. And modest is dress, but modest is also in your behavior. But it does include how you dress.
So in Numbers 15, men are commanded to put tassels on the corners of their garments. And the Greek translation of that uses the word kanaf, which means a corner, but it also means a wing of a bird. So we jump from the command to put the tassels all the way up to Malachi, where it says that the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in his wings. And it's that same word that is used in Numbers 15 for the tassels on the corners of the garment. The common folk looked at this as a promise. They understood the Son of Righteousness to be a metaphor for a messianic figure who would come in that great and terrible day of the Lord, at the same time that he would send the spirit of Elijah to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children. The Son of Righteousness would rise with healing in his wings, meaning in the tassels on the garment. And so they felt, in folklorish kind of traditional understanding, that the tassels on the prayer shawl of holy men might be a connector to healing power. In the Gospel of Mark chapter 6, he makes a kind of throwaway comment that the people would wait on the shore for Jesus to arrive and to land so that they might touch the fringe of his garment. And we see that enacted in a very powerful way in the story of the woman with the issue of blood. For 12 years, she's been in a state of uncleanness. Her interaction with society, with synagogue, with all kinds of friends has been extremely curtailed. This is her last great hope, is that as she follows Jesus through the streets of Capernaum, she might somehow come into contact with him, because he is known as a healer and he's known as compassionate. But she doesn't dare do it from in front of him. She doesn't want to be seen, and she stealthily reaches up and touches the talit, touches his prayer shawl and the fringe, the tzitzit, and instantly power goes out from him, and she is healed.
Don't go away. When we come back, Danny and I arrive at Caesarea, and I meet Baruch Sturman on the shores of the Mediterranean to see how the biblical blue dye was made in the 1st century.
First Century Foundations is committed to helping those in Israel who are most in need. And this is possible because of people like you. Your donations are supporting the most vulnerable in the land, especially aging Holocaust survivors. By providing them with food and medication and spending quality time with them, First Century Foundations with our partner ministries are making a real difference in the lives of people who have experienced so much suffering.
People like us who lost everything and live with the pain, to have people that help us a little bit, we're very grateful.
Call or write today and receive our bi-monthly newsletter, including the Israel Prayer Watch, to help you pray for all the ministries we support in Israel. Partner with us for just $30 a month or more, and your generous donations can make a difference in Israel today.
Danny and I left Nazareth Village and headed southwest toward the Mediterranean Sea to Caesarea Maritima, Rome's administrative, cultural, and economic capital in 1st century Judea. The ruins along the coast were truly breathtaking, and even beneath the waters, remains of King Herod's magnificent harbor and palace can be explored. I was thrilled when I found Baruch waiting for me by the water. Baruch, there you are.
Yes.
I found you. What a beautiful setting. This is gorgeous.
The shores of Caesarea, the ancient city.
Well, Baruch, it's so great to finally meet you in person. We were able to do a podcast together, our Keeping It Israel podcast, a few months back, but there's nothing quite like in person. Today's episode, we're talking about, what is it that Jesus might wear in his in the time that he lived? And I guess one of the things that we know for sure that a Jewish person would wear in the 1st century would be the prayer shawl, or
the talit.
The talit.
Here is a talit that I put on this morning. Every single day I wrap myself in this.
Yes.
And it has on it these ritual fringes, the tzitzit. This would have been not just something that they wore when they prayed, but it was kind of like a toga, so it would have been the average everyday dress, but the difference that the Jews added to that everyday dress was of course, these fringes.
Right, right. And you're going to talk to us about not just the fringes, but there is a very special color that every one of these fringes has.
Right.
And there is a very unique process as to how we get that color.
This is really one of the main components of the commandment to wear these fringes are, of course, as the Bible states, a cord of blue on the tassels. So this blue really is what makes the talit so special.
I love the explanation and the imagery and all of the symbolism, and we talked at length about some of this on the podcast. But today we want to see the process. So
yes.
What do you think? Let's see how this color is achieved.
Excellent. Well, it all starts with, shall we say, a lowly sea snail. Mm-hmm. Maybe just about as low as you can get. Crawls around its whole life on the bottom of the ocean looking for scraps. And it's those little scraps, especially the meat. This is a very interesting snail. Most snails are vegetarians, but this snail eats meat. And that's where it all begins, because as part of the digestive process, in order to neutralize some of the problematic components of the meat, it stores them in a little gland, and that will become the precursor to this amazing dye that we're gonna see now. And so we have to extract that precursor from the snail. You need many, many snails, of course. After you extract this gland from the snail, what we do is we dry it out, and we get this very, very dark purple powder. And that's where we're going to start. I have a little beaker here, which will do all of our work in. Happens to be that this rock is really amazing. It's better than a lab table. It's got all these little crags in it for everything you need. You don't need drawers or anything. So here is basically what we're going to be needing for our dye. Smell that. What do you think?
Okay. It smells like
fish.
Like a snail
like
shell.
Dead fish. Yeah.
Yeah, like dead fish is right.
Okay, a little bit of water that we're going to add. Hot water. I have that here. Now, what color do you see that water?
It's still fairly clear at the moment.
Exactly my point. This dye is so stable that it won't dissolve in water, but that leads to a problem. If it doesn't dissolve, meaning it can't bond to water, how do you get it to bond to the shirt? And so what we're going to need to do, and what they would have needed to do in ancient times, is to figure out some chemical trick that will get this water to absorb, or the dye to dissolve in it. In ancient times, you would have accomplished what I'm going to accomplish now with a little bit of stale urine, a little bit of salt. It would have taken you maybe 2 weeks to simmer on a little fire while the fermentation happened. We don't have 2 weeks, so we're going to do this all in just a minute. And so what we have here is, for chemists out there, this is called a very strong reducing agent. And as you can tell, slowly, we're starting to get some color. And what we're going to do now is we're ready to add the wool.
Okay.
So we're going to put the wool
Here we go.
into the dye and let it sit for just a few moments. And it's going to sit here now in the beautiful sun that you only find on the shores of the Mediterranean, where we are now. With the Roman conquest, and especially the great wars in the 7th century between the Romans and the Arabs, control kept getting wrested from one side to another side, and the dye houses basically were destroyed, and all of that knowledge of ancient dyeing was lost. About 200 years ago, with the archaeological excavations that here, Caesarea is one of them, the archaeologists started to find interesting things. They found mounds of these broken snails.
Right.
So archaeologists start to think, well, maybe there was something that these snails could produce. Coins were found from the ancient times, from the Phoenicians, and lo and behold, you find these snails prominent on these coins. So these snails must have been very important in the ancient world, and slowly but surely archaeologists, historians, and then scientists start to piece together that these snails must have been the source of those beautiful ancient dyes, Tyrian purple and biblical blue. And so they found that you could take these snails and dye with them this magnificent, beautiful, beautiful color. Now, what color would you call that?
I would say purple.
Purple, indeed. Yeah. And yet the tradition maintained that tchelet was not purple, but rather sky blue.
Right.
And therein you found an impossible conundrum. The source of tchelet are these snails. These snails produce a magnificent purple.
Right.
And tchelet is blue. One of those statements is false, but which one? In 1985, a chemist here in Israel was doing a little bit of research and trying to figure out exactly what was going on with these snails and the dye, and he did exactly what we're doing right now. He came outside. The sun's rays came down without anybody seeing. We're turning that purple into something completely different, and what we're going to see now as we take it out, hopefully, is what that chemist discovered. So we're going to take this out and allow it, in chemical terms, to oxidize. And it's going to slowly but surely change its color, but not back into the original color of purple, because something has happened to it.
Look at that.
And what you're going to get as it changes and changes, we'll leave it here for a few seconds,
Is the blue.
is this beautiful blue.
Wow.
If you do it and you add one element, the sun, then what you get is, instead of purple, you get blue.
Incredible. That's amazing. Well, Baruch, thank you so much for being with us today, for showing us this incredible demonstration, but also for the heart and the passion behind your explanation. The blue is coming, and that's absolutely incredible. And we know now that Jesus wore a tallit and would have worn this color. Now we know how the color was achieved, and I think that's incredible. You know, we talk about purple and the symbolism of royalty and all those kind of things, but purple was the easy color to get out of this.
Yes.
Right? This is truly a difficult process and an amazing science behind all of this that somehow the ancients figured out.
The ancients were a lot smarter than we give them credit for.
Yeah.
In many, many ways.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you so much. Thanks for joining us today as we learned about the clothes Jesus wore 2,000 years ago, discovering just how significant they were. Please join us again next week as we continue our quest to get to know Jesus better right here in his homeland.